The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Our webinar will start in approximately 2 minutes. Hang tight. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Craig Gudorf. I'm the Director of Marketing at AVI Systems, and our topic today is technology for returning to the office. We understand that today's environment is filled with uncertainty, and employees are just starting to return to the office. Today's webinar will provide you insight into how to create a safer workplace where you and your employees can communicate and collaborate effectively. Our speaker today is Brad Sousa, the Chief Technology Officer at AVI Systems. His role is to work with executives from around the country in some of America's leading companies and help them achieve this outcome. He's recognized as an industry authority on visual and unified collaboration, digital media, and enterprise solutions. He's a frequent speaker and a contributor to the Forbes Technology Council. He can often be seen riding around San Diego on his Harley. Hey, Brad, how are you doing today? It looks like you're back in the office in San Diego.
I am, and you know what? I did not ride my Harley to work. Shame on me. Good to see you,
So
Craig.
is it good to be back in the office? How are you liking it?
It is. It is good to be back in the office. It's good to have people around you that you're familiar with, and back into a sense of community at work. It's good. A little odd because it's a little sparse, right? Now, not the entire workforce is back, but it's still good to be there. I'm looking forward to today, Craig. I've been looking forward to this for weeks now, and I'm excited about spending time with everybody on the call today.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear your remarks.
Well, this topic. Well, first of all, before I get into it, thank you to you, Craig, and to Alec and to the marketing team for hosting this, coordinating this, getting this together. I appreciate the effort, and in particular, this topic has kind of caught me off guard. It has become a really, really hot topic. I'm spending a lot of time doing one-on-one executive briefings with customers. Last week, you and I were part of a global virtual conference, and of the 4 topical keynotes, this was the one that was highest demand, most attended, It seems like it's a really, really hot topic around this whole return to work.
Completely agree.
So how about you and I just kind of set up some rules of engagement today? Normally, this is done in a smaller setting, and we'll continue to do, by the way, one-on-one executive briefings. What we find is that it's often done a couple of times inside an organization. Maybe some of those who are participating with us today might say, hey, can we have you present this to a larger audience inside my organization? That happens quite frequently, but those smaller groups create a lot of dialogue, and we can't, because of the size of the number of people that are participating today, we can't really create that dialogue. So what's a good way for people to give some feedback and share some ideas, you think, Craig?
Well, I got a couple ideas. First of which is what we found in these events, like the global event we did last week, is just people want to hear from each other. A lot of people are thinking a lot of the same things. So I would encourage our attendees today to use the question feature in this and to pose their questions so we can all see what's on your mind. And that there's going to be a lot of really interesting information shared today. So certainly we can't cover everything that we want to talk about and everything that's on your minds. But the AVI Seller is going to be a great resource for our customers for a follow-up conversation to kind of keep this going and see how we might be able to help people create a safer work environment and help their employees come back and collaborate with one another.
A good point. So one of the things that we've done is we've integrated some polling questions throughout our presentation today, our conversation, and that's going to give those who are participating in the call an opportunity to guide the outcome and help us focus on topics that are most relevant to them. So I'm encouraging all of you to participate in the polls, and even if you see the poll trending a particular direction that you think matches your perspective, still participate in it, because it gives us a chance to kind of gauge how strong the voice is, not just the outcome of it. So we appreciate you participating in that. So what do you think, Craig? Should we just get into it and we'll get started here?
Let's get started.
All right. So let's take a couple of minutes and just give you an idea of how to get a hold of me. So as Craig mentioned, I'm CTO at AVI Systems, which is to say, I think I have the best job on the planet. And if you break it down into that context, man, I get to work with an amazing organization where the people around me are also shareholders in our company, and that creates an awesome culture. I get to work with amazing customers and play with the coolest toys. So what's wrong with that job description, right? Here's the part I want to share with you, though, and that is this discussion that we're going to have today is got some thought leadership of our own, but is really also a consolidation of a lot of different resources. There's 25, 30 different resources that we've consolidated or compiled together in some of the observations and findings that we have. We'll make that bibliography of all of the fundamental research. So if you want to go back and read an article or a report or a white paper on your own, you can get access to it. That's why I have my contact information here. You're always welcome to get a hold of me, but if you want to email me, you can get a hold of me at brad.souza@avisystems.com. I encourage you to follow me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/n/Brad Souza. I post quite a bit there, not just my thoughts about what's happening in the industry, but that's really my social media platform of choice around leadership and specifically around technology development. So if you get a hold of me on either of those two platforms and ask for the bibliography, I'll be sure to get that back to you, or you can reach out to your AVI Systems account manager and they'll help get you mapped in as well. So I wanted to share with you just how to connect with me, and if you're interested in getting a copy of the basic resources that we used for the formulation of our observations, you can get access to that. We'd be happy to share it with you. All right, so I want to start off by talking about a particular concept, and that concept is, have you ever found yourself in the long middle? And what I mean by that is this idea that we find ourselves sometimes in the progression between the starting line and the finish line. It's that place where you're hoping that you're rounding the last turn, you're coming to the finish line, but it seems like it takes forever to get there. It's that long middle. Well, that's actually where we are at, we think, as it relates to COVID-19 and this whole return to work kind of idea. It started off for us at the beginning in a stage that we call flip the switch. It was that early stage of shelter at home. I need to create a virtual workforce. Many of us, it caught us off guard as technology leaders and thought leaders. It caught us off guard. We didn't realize that we would have to virtualize essentially 100% of our workforce. And as a result of that, there were a lot of asks that were really around that sounded like, can you flip a switch? Here's what it sounded like to me. It was like, hey, Brad, is there a switch you can flip and expand the capacity of my UC overnight? Or can you move me from on-prem or hybrid to almost exclusively the cloud? Can you flip a switch and make that happen? Or is there a switch we can flip somewhere that will get me online and create virtual town halls because my CEO now needs to communicate with the entire workforce, not once a year or once a quarter, but every week? What does that look like? And that was kind of the beginning. That was the starting line of all of this. And the finish line, we think, is whatever normal is going to look like. And we think that that's actually going to be post-social distancing. The return to normal is going to happen when we are not social distancing anymore. And so the phase that we're in right now is this long middle. It's this phase that we call return to work. It's not return to normal, it's return to work. And it's the recovery phase between shelter at home and return to normal. And this phase is interesting because most of us, we want to move through the middle as fast as we can so that we can get to the finish line. And the reality is that we think that there's all sorts of lessons to be learned during this return to work phase that will not only enable us to be productive as organizations in the return to work phase, but if we understand the attributes and expectations of our workforce during the return to work phase, that will help set us up for faster success, give us velocity when we start returning to normal. And so we're actually paying a lot of attention to return to work. And there's a lot of conversation we're having around this idea of return to work. So we don't want to move too fast through this particular phase that we're in. We want to get what goodness we can out of it. And so that begins to ask some questions like, are there some specific attributes that can help define and characterize this return to work phase that we're currently in? So having said that, for many of us on this call, the idea of there being a start, a middle, and an end, as opposed to just a start and an end, might be new to us. So I'd like to ask you to join me in a polling question. And the polling question is really something like this. Does your organization have a formal return to work plan? And in the poll questions, if you kind of look over to the right-hand side and you see where it says polls, you're going to see the poll question come up, and it's open right now. And what I'd like you to do is answer the question and by selecting one of three choices that most fits your organization. None of them are probably exactly where your organization is, but the first option might be no formal plan. We don't have any formal plan. We might have some formal actions, like we need to take our temperature before we go to work, or we need to wear a mask when we're in the office, or whatever it is. There might be formal actions, but not a formal plan. Or there might be, yeah, we have a formal plan, but it doesn't include a technology plan. Or the third option is, yes, we have a formal plan and it does include a technology plan. So if you would help us out by responding to that question, that would be helpful for us. Hey, Craig, what are you beginning to see as a result of that?
Lots of responses coming in. Clearly, we've struck a chord with this one. Let's keep the poll open for about another 5 or 10 seconds, and then we'll shut her down. Early indications, though, is that a lot of people, over half, are in the last category, yes, including technology. So here's where we stand right now. 55% said, yes, we do have a plan that includes technology. 28% said yes, but not with technology. And about 16% said no formal plan at all. What are your thoughts about that data, Brad?
Yeah, that's interesting. So what we hear is that there's a lot of conversation around having a plan that includes technology. This actual result is actually higher than I had expected. Most organizations have a plan, but don't have technology included in that plan. And so that's really a good sign for the community that we have on the call today. We're going to be talking about what that plan might look like and what should be included in that plan. So excellent result there. So let's begin to look at this return to work phase, and let's look at it first through the lens of corporate real estate and spatial planning. Are there some particular attributes around corporate real estate or spatial planning that we think are going to impact what a successful plan might look like? And when we did our research, there's a lot of really good voices out there: Cushman & Wakefield, Gensler, CBRE, JLL, McKinsey and Company. There's lots of really good insight into these topics, but we wanted to share three that we think have got the biggest impact to the communities that we serve. One is the fact that personal space is going to continue to grow. Prior to COVID-19, the amount of square footage assigned to an individual worker was about 60 square feet. That was pretty much the average. That's basically a little under an 8-foot by 8-foot space. And so the result of COVID-19 is that the amount of personal space is actually going to increase. We see it being somewhere around 120 square feet. Some people say it's 100 square feet, but we think it's going to be between 100 and 120 square feet per individual. So imagine what that means as it relates to an open office concept where you have a lot of workstations that are connected together and people are in close proximity to each other. Or imagine what that might look like as it relates to, I don't know, like a conference room where you want to have maybe 3 or 4 people in a meeting, and that now requires a room that's 20 by 20 or 15 by 30 to try and accommodate the number of people that you want in a meeting and still maintain social distancing. We think also that teams, in particular knowledge workers, will continue to work remotely, but then come to the office for specific reasons. And we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about this in a few minutes, but the fact is that we think that the workforce is going to come back to the office, especially in this return to work phase, for specific reasons. They're not just going to come back to the office to do work. In fact, most of the work will actually be done at home, but they'll come to the office for a number of other reasons other than just doing their normal routine work. Now, that's going to put a lot of emphasis on highly flexible workspaces and floor plan layouts. And there's going to be an emphasis and a value based on the ability to rebalance workspaces. And so we expect that the open office concept is going to continue, but in the open office, there's probably going to be conference rooms in the open office, which is not particularly common in the pre-COVID kind of workplace. You would go into a room and shut a door to have a meeting, but we think that there's going to be a combination of meetings in meeting rooms, but there's also going to be maybe meeting spaces in the open as well. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on rebalancing the workplace, and especially as we work through the return to work phase, we think that the requirements on spatial balancing in the beginning is going to be a little bit different at the end, and it might even be that the amount of personal square footage per individual begins to reduce the closer we get to return to normal. And then the third thing is that we think that there's going to be a resurgence or emphasis on lease renewals and extensions rather than on new leases. And those savvy tenants are going to negotiate into their lease extensions or lease renewals some sort of COVID-19 concession, because there's going to be technology that's going to be required in the workplace, maybe some tenant improvements that are going to need to be required, maybe there's going to be changes into your HVAC, maybe there's changes in your security systems, all sorts of things that are going to be changes to the workspace, and some of those changes are going to be capital improvements, and that we think is going to get baked into a lease extension or a lease renewal. And so that's an element that we want to kind of pay attention to as we begin to look at this idea of return to work through the lens of spatial planning and what real estate is going to look like for organizations. So what will it look like through the lens of the worker? Well, there's going to be a lot of different things that are going to impact the individual worker. But one of the things that we see is that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on personal behavior and some information that has been treated more privately may or may not be treated quite so privately as a result during this return to work phase. So here's an example. We think that many organizations are going to require workers to be able to document not just what they're doing at the workplace, but how they got to work. So think about these kinds of questions. Did you take public transportation? Did you share a ride with somebody? Did you take an Uber? Did you stop at a Starbucks and get a cup of coffee someplace? All of those kinds of things, if you become ill, those kinds, and you're at work when you discover it, all of those kinds of data points are probably going to need to be reported somehow. And those have been traditionally very private. And we think that there's going to be some sort of conversation around what information needs to be tracked and what information doesn't as part of your return to work plan. We think that there's going to be a strong emphasis around workforce health, and that includes location monitoring. So it isn't just, is Brad at the office? It's, where has Brad been at the office? Did he go into the lunchroom? Has he been out into the rack fab area or in the manufacturing site or in the warehouse? Where has Brad been? What conference rooms has he been in? Those kinds of things. We think that there's going to be a higher emphasis on where people are and not quite so anonymous. And that makes us feel a little uncomfortable, quite honestly. And so there's a lot of conversation going on right now around what we call the creepy meter. How far is too far in understanding personal behaviors, personal habits, and information that's related to what I do as an individual as opposed to an anonymous part of the workforce? And we think that a lot of this is going to drive a lot of touchless technologies. Now, there's a lot of conversation around touchless technology in meeting rooms. We're going to be talking about that. But there's also a lot of other touchless information, or a lot of other touchless technologies here in the office here. As an example, all the little soap pumps that you would use to wash your hands in the restroom, those have been all replaced now with contactless or touchless technologies for soap dispensing. You think about it in terms of faucets and trash cans, but what about things like refrigerator doors and entryways and all of that kind of stuff? There's just going to be a resurgence of touchless technologies. So what is it going to look like as it relates to the workforce? So not the worker individually, but through the work lens of the people in a workplace. So we think that the return to work is going to carry with it a heightened requirement to integrate COVID-19 restrictions into the workplace. Now, what we mean by that is not just having some regulations, because the application of those rules or regulations or behaviors that we need to have, those will probably start out to be manual at first. As an example, at AVI, when we began to open our offices back up to the workforce, it was a very manual, maybe a sheet of paper that you wrote down some questions and you answered things like, have you had a temperature? Have you had come in contact with anybody? Have you traveled to certain locations? All of those kinds of things started out very manual. Now it's becoming more online, and we think that eventually it's going to get much more automated. And why would that happen? Why would the automation of return to work regulations and requirements, why would that happen? Well, we're beginning to see already the monetization of the analytics around compliance with social distancing, compliance with state and local regulations around going back into the office. They're becoming monetized as insurance companies begin to try and measure what amount of risk that might happen to the workforce as a result, whether that's I don't know, workplace insurance, or whether that's group health insurance, or whatever it is. It's starting now to make its way into the actuarial tables, and it's going to eventually get monetized. And so our ability to track and provide real meaningful analytics is going to be helpful as a result of that. We think that people will work from home, but they'll meet at the office. And this is an important distinction. So we're going to talk in the next slide around why people are going to do this. But the concept here is that the emails that I do, the reports that I write, the research that I do, that's likely going to happen at home. But there's going to be meetings that I'm going to have at the office for a number of reasons. And we'll talk about those reasons in just a little bit. But as a result of that, what that's going to do is continue to put pressure on the infrastructure needed to support the virtual workforce. Now, this includes things like UC, obviously, right? Unified collaboration, but it also is going to include things like how we do document management, co-authoring, document sharing, how you share those documents inside your organization and then outside your organization. It includes a lot of information and large data. So the metrics we talked about in IoT devices, but also around things like media streaming, large audience messaging, video on demand, all of those other kind of attributes. So there's going to be continued pressure on the infrastructure needed to support a virtual workforce. In fact, we think that the pressure on that infrastructure is going to increase as people return to the workplace, not decrease, because now you're going to have a hybrid workforce that's both at the workplace and at home, and that's going to cause us to rethink how we support the technologies that we support. So why will people go back to the office? I mean, is there any possible reason why people would go back to the office given all of these things that we just talked about? Well, it's interesting. Some reports are starting to come out now that are stating that as much as 40% of an organization's workforce is already working back at the office at least part-time. 40%, that's much higher than we would have expected at this stage of the return to work phase. And why would that be? Why would we be beginning to see such a high percentage of individuals going back to work? Well, the answer is some workers are just ready to get out of the house. I mean, that's just plain and simple. And there's all sorts of psychographic reasons as to why that's happening. Many of us have a very strong sense of identity and purpose related to our work. There's a whole work community that we've established over time. And it's important for us emotionally to get connected to those people and to resume a sense of community. And as we resume that sense of community, we resume a sense of normal at the same time. And that doesn't always happen over UC. There's a new phrase introduced into the American vernacular, and that phrase is Zoom fatigue. We've heard that, probably all of us on this call have heard it, maybe even said it. And it's not specific to Zoom as a platform. It's specific to this notion of, man, I'm tired of being on video calls. I would much rather meet with somebody in person. And so some workers are just ready to get out of the house and get to the workplace. But we also believe that some office work requires people to be together. There's some work that you just can't do over distance as well as you can do together. Here's some examples of that. Consensus building on big decisions really requires people to be together in the same place. You can come to decisions on smaller topics in 30 and 60-minute increments over UC. You can come to decisions around how to fix something over UC. In fact, problem solving in the fixing stage, that often is augmented and improved through UC. But the idea of building consensus on really big strategic decisions, those require us to actually be together in the same place. There's too many stakeholders to do it just over video. There's too much information that you have to go through. If you're solving a problem and you're not fixing it, you're really trying to implement an enterprise-wide solution to that problem. There's all sorts of operational elements that you have to discuss, and brainstorming and problem solving and decision making, and lots of decision trees that have to be talked through and documented as a result of that. And that kind of work happens better in proximity over extended periods of time. Thinking of some financial services customers of ours, and I just can't imagine them talking with an institutional investor about a long-term institutional portfolio strategy and doing that over Teams or Zoom or WebEx or some sort of virtual connection. The strategy really needs to be worked out in person. The status and progression of that strategy can be done over UC. So there's an example of what I'm talking about. We think that there's going to be experiences that people are going to want to have, and that those experiences are going to often connect customers to brand promises. And they're going to do that sometimes through demonstrations. There's just things that you have to see that you can't see remotely. And sometimes as a result of that, those demonstrations, those experiences that you want to create for your customers, those have to happen in a conversation at a location. So today I have lots and lots of meetings with manufacturing partners, all day long, every day. But if they really want me to buy into their go-to-work strategy or their go-to-market strategy, or if they want me to buy in to what that particular product can do, they often need me to experience something or see something that I can't do over a video call. And so the conversation might be, hey, I'm in San Diego, why don't you meet me? Well, they're not going to meet me at my house, they're going to meet me at the office. Or they might say, hey, can you come take a look at what we're developing in our lab? Well, that's not going to happen at somebody's home. That's going to in their garage. That's going to happen at an office. And so you can see where I'm headed with this. There's just some work that needs to be done at the office. And the last point here I want to make is that one size doesn't fit all. We've had lots of rural communities in the United States. AVI's got offices in a lot of those communities. They just have never stopped. They've always been in the office. Their geographic market has not shut down. They've continued to work. They never sheltered at home, as an example. Some work requires personal interaction and proximity. Think of healthcare, think of getting your hair cut as an example. And some industries are really designed for people to work in one location. I can't imagine Ford, as an example, building the next Mustang over Zoom. It's just not going to happen, obviously. You need to have people together to do work. And that's true for AVI. When we're building a system for a customer, there's a manufacturing process for that system where a number of different people with different skill sets touch it and move it forward in the manufacturing process of that solution or system for the customer. So there's a lot of organizations that need to have people come back to work just to complete their work tasks. So if that's true, are there indicators, if it's true that people will want to and need to go back to the office, at least for some portion of their work, what are some indicators that will show us or tell us that people are ready to go back to the workplace? Well, we think that one is return to travel. So as we monitor the amount of people booking hotels or booking airline flights, that's going to be a leading indicator to us that people are going to need to get back to work, because people are traveling to meet with other people, and they're not going to want to have those meetings in their home. They're going to want to have those meetings at the workplace. And so I monitored the TSA statistics probably 2 or 3 times a week. And in the last 2 weeks, the percentage of people traveling on US air flights, domestic flights, has doubled. Now, we're still way off. We're only at like 20 or 25% of where we were pre-COVID, but we're starting to see a pretty significant ramp up of people returning to flights, which means return to travel, which means return to the office. We think there's a trend to watch, which is new leases versus renewals. And as the balance begins to tip towards new leases as opposed to renewals, that's an indicator that those organizations are expecting people to return to the office. We think that pervasive COVID-19 testing is a requirement for people to return back to the office because they feel when there's pervasive testing, they feel safe going into a work environment, knowing that if they start feeling sick, they can rule out COVID-19 right away. And then lastly, return to school means return to work, because a lot of parents can't return to the workplace very easily while their children are still at home for school. So I'm going to open up next polling question, and that is, what do you think? In the next 90 days, how much of your workforce will go back to the office at least part-time? Would you please click into this polling question and let us know what you're thinking? Will it be, I'm not expecting people to go back all week even, but just maybe a portion of their work week they're going to spend at the office for one or more of the reasons that we just discussed. In the next 90 days, is that 25% of your workforce or less? Is it 50% or less? Is it more than half of your workforce? What are you thinking? And so, Craig, I'd like to get that polling question open and have a conversation around this particular poll. I appreciate you answering. Thank you for doing that. And even if you're seeing the poll reflect your expectation, would you please still weigh in? Because the number of people, not just the percentage, is also really important to what we're doing in our conversation today, and also where we think we need to spend our time in terms of planning. So Craig, what's your thoughts? What are you beginning to see as it relates to the poll?
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm getting a ton of responses coming in, so I'm going to give these guys just a few more seconds. As they're doing that, I also want to remind people that there is a question feature here. We would love to be able to get to some of your questions at the end. We've received a few already, but please come out with other items that you would like to chat with Brad about at the end. So this is really interesting. So we'll be shutting down the poll in just a few minutes, but it's almost a dead heat between 25% or less and 50% or less. So the way it stands now is 39% in the first category, 36% said 50% or less, and then 25% are already 50% or more back in the office. Wow.
That's really.
What do you make out of that?
You know, I love the fact that we can get this feedback in real time. Most organizations when they begin to think about return to work, they're kind of saying, why would anybody go to work? But as they begin to look at the workflows that their workforce goes through, in other words, how they actually perform their work, then the percentage of the workforce returning to work begins to increase. I really like the fact that we're about 39% are saying 25% or less, 36% are saying 50% or less. And here's the thing, that suggests to me that there's a majority that believes a significant portion of our workforce. I mean, if you take 50% or less and 50% or more, that's 61% of the polling audience. That says that all of us believe that a significant portion of our workforce is going to return to work for at least some portion of their work week. And if that's the case, we should be really thinking about what can we do to accelerate their productivity, make them more comfortable with the return to work environment, encourage them to come back to work for the right reasons, have a conversation, an open conversation with the workforce around what we think their expectations are, and begin to message that to encourage them to come back to the workplace. So here's what I'd like to do next. We're going to spend some time talking about what we call AVI's top 10 targets to add velocity to your return to work strategy. And I've broken these 10 actions into 2 categories. The first category is what we call workforce enablers, and the second category is really specifically around UC and meeting technologies. So let's take a look at the workforce enablers first. So as we begin to look at what are the top 10 ways we can add velocity to a return to work strategy, let's begin by having a conversation around what a plan should look like. So it's not just have a plan, but it's really have a plan around understanding your workforce's expectations of what return to work looks like. So at AVI, we have this model called Pro Development. And that model is before we do any kind of design, it's really around answering the questions around, can we identify what the user communities look like of a specific technology, and can we identify what their expectations are around what the technology is supposed to do? And so in this particular case, it's not necessarily around a technology, it's around what does your workforce believe that what are their expectations around what a good return to work environment is going to look like? And it's going to vary, quite honestly, we think, based upon the user community. Some of the workers are going to have a certain opinion because they're maybe in manufacturing. Others are going to have a different set of expectations because they're in product management or product development or marketing or sales or whatever it is. And as a result of that, we think it's really important before you do anything else to go through an exercise that defines what are their expectations by particular user communities and user groups, and how do we begin to work out a plan or a strategy that meets the expectations that we think are most important. Secondly, we think that there's going to be a requirement and need to drive proximity and social distancing analytics. And we talked a little bit about that in a few slides ago. We think that there's going to be a requirement to not only establish policies or behaviors that we want to have with our workforce in terms of social distancing in particular, but we think that there's also going to be requirements to measure and report on that. And so what technologies can we use to drive meaningful, accurate reporting around it? So as an example, if you know that you need to have a conference room that can only seat so many people, is an occupancy sensor good enough to know whether people are there, or do you need to have an occupancy sensor that can do the counting of individuals, or do you need to have something like a camera that can identify not only not only are there people present, but where are they seated, how much distance are there between them, and maybe associate that with individual names. Now, that might be going a little bit too far, but those are the kinds of conversations that we're starting to have and hear with our customers. We're also thinking that there's a lot of information around workforce wellness. So there's been a huge series of requests and emphasis around temperature monitoring as people begin to plan return to work. That temperature monitoring, though, how you do it, not what you use to do it with, but how you're actually doing it really varies. And so there's a lot of cameras that are thermal imagers today, but they don't necessarily provide measurements in motion, and they don't necessarily provide accurate measurements as the environment that you're measuring, like a lobby, changes based upon day part or number of people that are in it, or whether your HVAC turned on, or all those other kinds of things. So having a really effective, accurate way of measuring temperature is super important. By the way, Craig, I want to say that Alec wrote a blog on this recently. It's on the AVI Systems site. If you click on blogs and do a search on it, really encourage you to read through that, because there's a lot of really interesting use case information around making temperature monitoring actually an effective tool, not just a compliance requirement. But we also think that there's going to be a lot of emphasis around workplace, what we call workplace readiness. And it's this idea, we have customers that we're delivering solutions on today that they're asking us to integrate software applications that monitor what workstations or conference rooms have been sanitized since the last person used it. So if you're coming into the office and you're going to use an open space to put down your laptop and do a little bit of emails between meetings and that kind of thing, after you use that space, that needs to be sanitized. And as a result of that, there's software applications that we're now integrating that present on a person's personal device, like their phone, what workspaces have been sanitized and able to be used. It's being integrated into digital signage and other corporate communications so that people can be aware at a moment where they can go work and where they probably shouldn't go work. And so things like this around workforce wellness, we think is going to be super important. We think that there's going to be a need around a virtual receptionist to enable people to come back into the workplace. It's going to be a workforce enabler. And what we think that's going to look like is something like this. So we've had applications like this for quite a while, but they're beginning to change and morph as a result of COVID-19 and return to work. We think of what's going to happen is you might imagine walking into a lobby, maybe that particular building doesn't have a receptionist in it. And as a result, based upon a proximity sensor, a virtual receptionist system turns on, and you might get a message on a screen that says, welcome to AVI as an example, and might present a QR code, and you hold your phone up to it and it scans, and that then passes to your phone a list of people that you might be in the facility to meet with. And so you find the person you want to talk to, and you tap on their name, and it creates a call between you and them. They verify who you are. They might pass to your phone a virtual badge. They might give you some wayfinding to find where the meeting room is that you're going to be in, or they might say, hey, if you would sit over there, make sure you have your badge. Someone's going to meet you and escort you, all of those kinds of things. You might go through some questions around your health. Have you traveled to certain locations? Have you taken your temperature? Blah, blah, blah. You might have thermal measurements or temperature sensing built into that virtual receptionist, all of these kinds of things. We think that that's going to be an application that's going to really enable people to come back to the workplace. And then lastly, we think that there's going to be increased demand on distance learning and personal development. And if you think about it from this perspective, we think that there's going to be a lot of new rules and behaviors that we're going to need to communicate to our workforce. Things like that are super simple, have nothing to do with technology, but like you enter a room on the left-hand side and you exit the room on the right-hand side, and all of these kinds of things that are behaviors that we need to change and communicate. There's going to be, as a result of that, there's going to be an increased demand on distance learning, increased demand on streaming, all of those kinds of things. Now, we also think that there's going to be changes in UC and meeting technology. So let's talk about 5 things that are part of our 10 targets that will add velocity to your return to work strategy. So one of them is, we think that there's going to be continued expansion or demand to expand both UC and integrating together UC and streaming technologies for virtual town halls. And again, this goes to that topic about all the new rules that you have to have in the workplace. There's a lot of people in the workforce that just need to have regular communication and contact from the leadership so that they have a sense of where the organization's going and how healthy the company is, all those kinds of things. And so there's going to be demand on UC, and in particular UC integrated with streaming and town halls. And that kind of leads into my next topic, which is creating ecosystems is critical. In the past, we could have maybe little silos, like, our production platform for UC might be Microsoft Teams, or it might be Zoom, or it might be WebEx. But we kind of allow people to use others when they need to. We think that those silos like that are going to basically gone. We think they need to have them all integrated to get today, because you're going to have such a large percentage of your workforce that's working from home and connected to people that are in the workplace. That's also going to drive down barriers between AV and UC, and it's going to drive down barriers between cloud services and on-prem infrastructure, and between multiple cloud services, like I mentioned. Next, we think that there's a rethinking about what conference rooms are going to look like, because we believe that the new huddle room is the old medium conference room. And if you think about the number of amount of square footage that you need to accommodate 3, 4, 5 people that you used to put shoulder to shoulder in a huddle room, that now is going to require a medium conference room. And more importantly than that, the old small conference room is now the large conference room. And that's significant for a number of reasons. It's going to change the way that we reserve rooms and prepare rooms for meetings, but it's also changing the level of complexity that the knowledge worker is going to come in contact with. Those larger rooms, the large boardrooms, the large conference rooms, the add, divide, combined training rooms, those kinds of things, conference centers, those rooms are typically not used as often as huddle rooms, small and medium conference rooms. And one of the reasons is because the technology is a bit more complex. You can't put a sound bar up in the front and get the same kind of microphone coverage or get the same kind of camera usage and all of that kind of stuff. So that's going to drive a different way of thinking, and it's going to cause us to adapt those larger rooms into more simpler designs, more simpler technology as a result of that. So there's some planning that needs to go around it. That brings me to my next topic, which is around touchless. So in particular, what I'm talking about is touchless control in the meeting space. So a little over a year ago, AVI introduced a model that was facial recognition for identity, voice and natural language processing for control. And so the basic concept behind this technology or proof of concept was that the camera was on in the room and the microphones were always off, and it would count the number of people in the room. It would ignore everybody's identity until it found the facial identity that matched the person who reserved the room. So if I did the meeting invite, it would be looking for me and ignoring everybody else. And as a result of that, when it saw that I was in the room, then it would prompt me for a voice command. And it would say, hey, Brad, I notice you reserved this room from 9 to 10. If you want to start your meeting, say start your meeting. And it only opens up the microphones in the room once it recognizes that the meeting host is there. Now you can manually override it, but the idea is trying to do this with touchless control. That's one way we think that touchless is going to happen. We think that this is probably the most common way that touchless is going to happen, is that our personal devices will become the new touch panel in the room. Now, it's not technically touchless, is it? But it is eliminating the need to touch any common equipment that other people would touch in your meeting space. And so using your personal device as the method of kicking off your meeting or changing the way that the technology is working in the room, like sharing a laptop or something like that. We think that that's going to be very, very popular, and there's a lot of technologies that are available that you can now get some demonstrations, some proofs of concepts on. And we think that for some customers, it's going to go back to a little bit more rudimentary way. The idea of meeting services, or what's often called white glove or concierge services, that's actually never gone away for much of the executive community, where somebody from a third party, maybe it's AVI or somebody else, dials into the conference room, greets the meeting participants, asks them if they're ready to join the meeting, and then connects the conference room to the meeting and make sure that everything is configured the way they need to have a successful meeting. For some organizations, they're going to choose to do that because they think return to work is going to be shorter, and maybe they don't want to invest the investment in changing the technology. And as a result of that, that might be the simplest way to support a touchless environment. And then lastly, we think that there's going to be a surge in experience centers. And here's what I mean by this. Today, meeting rooms are basically, there's no distinction for the most part between an internal facing meeting room and an external facing meeting room. Customers that show up at my office here in San Diego, they're going to use the same meeting rooms that I use for the AVI workforce. But we think in this return to work phase that there's going to be some number of rooms that are going to get some special attention because they're going to be used specifically for external meetings, supply chain meetings, customer meetings, and so forth. And we want them to connect We want them to have a reason to come to my site so that we can work on solving big problems together and move forward big initiatives. And part of that reason is to create an experience in my office that they can't have when they just do a virtual call. And so we think that there's going to be a resurgence in experience centers and spaces that are specifically designed to meet customer expectations and create an affinity between the customer and our brand. So those are the 10 things. I know I went through them really quick. Here's what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a little bit of feedback, and you're going to guide some of the conversation here. We're going to have another polling question. And here's the question I'd like to ask. Of the 10 actions, what are the two most important workforce enablers you think for your organization? And so is that have a plan, not just a plan, but a plan based on workforce expectations? Would it be making sure that you have proximity and distancing analytics? And Craig, if we could open the poll, I'd love to get the polling started on this. Is it around wellness, workforce wellness and thermal monitoring? Is that a big thing to you? Is a virtual receptionist a thing that you think you're just going to really need to have? Is an increase in capacity for professional development training, is that really going to be a demand that you're going to have? What are the two most important workforce enablers for your organization? And when I say important, kind of looking at that through the lens of, boy, I know I'm going to have to get some energy behind this early. What's some thoughts between you? Wow, looking at the information here coming in, love the polling results. What are you starting to see, Craig?
Yeah, no, the results are coming in really strong, getting a ton of votes here so far. Please keep voting, but the early indications are the number one response is having a plan based on workforce expectations. That is far and away, with 76% selecting that answer. Second place right now would be the second choice, which is proximity distancing, with nearly 50%. So those two really stand apart from all the others as the most important workforce enablers.
Super interesting. You know, there's been a large amount of conversation, a lot of energy around thermal imaging and monitoring. That's actually in third place and not that far away from professional development, an increase in professional development and training. That's really super interesting, and I appreciate everybody weighing in on that. Any thoughts from you, Craig, one way or the other on this particular poll, things that might stand out to you?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. The plan is such an important part. And, you know, back to the very first polling question, which is, we are both surprised at the number of organizations that have really approached this pandemic with a planful process, including technology. I got to think a lot of people on the call today are actually a little bit ahead of what we're used to seeing from some of the other customers we talked to. So I think the plan is really consistent with what they told us earlier.
Yeah, here's the interesting part, is that this particular question is based on workforce expectations. And so it kind of leads me to believe that while many of us have a plan and we're working that plan, and that plan includes technology, we haven't actually integrated into the planning process an understanding of workforce expectations. And so as a result of that, we might be applying technologies or having a technology plan that we're not really sure is going to be well adopted. So that's a really, really interesting observation. I'm going to ask my last polling question, and it's really around the UC meeting and technologies grouping of our 10 actions. And would you do the same for me? And if we could open this poll, I would appreciate that. Would you do the same thing for me and help weigh in on what you think are going to be most important for you? Is it expanding UC and streaming and supporting things like virtual town halls and a virtual workforce? Is it creating ecosystems and making sure that multiples of these cloud services are now integrated together, or hybrid of cloud plus prem? Or is it really around this idea of the new huddle room as the old medium conference room, and we need to start getting some plans and actions early around what the impact of that might be in our workplace? Is it this idea of touchless control and either using things like voice or facial recognition or a personal device as the new control interface? Or is it this idea that we need to take a certain percentage of our meeting spaces and really make them customer facing so that we create an experience that motivates customers to come meet with us at our place as opposed to just doing a video call? What's your thoughts around this? And if you're starting to see a trend, if you're able to see the trends and they're shaping what your thinking is, or you think that matches what your thinking is, please vote, continue to vote anyway, because the volume of the voice is as important as what it's saying. So thanks for sharing with us. Craig, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of which, we got a ton of votes in here so far, and as we'll be closing the poll here in about 10 seconds. But as we do, just a reminder for everyone on the call today, we're nearing the top of the hour, and we've almost completed the presentation here. There have been several questions that come in. I understand if you need to leave here soon, that's fine. We're going to continue Q&A on for about 10 minutes past the top of the hour for those that want to stick around, because we do have a couple interesting questions that I think you'd like to hear the responses to. Okay, so regarding this particular polling question, what we're seeing so far is the top response is the first one, expanding UC and streaming at about 60%, selected that answer. And then it's pretty close with the next one. The fourth choice, touchless control, at 46% is the next highest answer, with creating ecosystems and new huddle room, both basically coming in at a third apiece. I guess when I look at this and you look at the importance of communicating to your workforce, and given the fact that so many people are at home now and they're not in the office, and there's so much to communicate and so much to relay onto your employees, that this town hall is a big deal, and that I'm not surprised to see it as a really important technology. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing, Craig, and I see that creating ecosystems and trying to address the shift from the huddle room, the new huddle room is the old medium conference room. Those two are actually neck and neck, and that says to me that both of those are going to get a lot of energy early on around how we begin to plan our meeting spaces and help workers feel comfortable coming back to the workplace as a result of that. And then, like you said, the touchless control is a really big thing. And there's a lot of technologies that have been around for a while, but haven't been really well adopted. And so there's a lot of conversation around doing some proofs of concepts and beginning to kind of experience what that might be before you begin to roll it out into your organization. So, Craig, I'm actually at the end of our presentation, and I want to say thank you to all of you who have joined. Really appreciate the fact that you've stayed with us as long as you have and have given us good feedback. Are there a couple of questions, Craig, that we really should answer before we say goodbye today?
Yeah, I think so. This one seems to be on the mind of a lot of people, and here it goes. It appears that many employees are just as productive at home as in the office. If that's the case, do you foresee in the future, when everyone has been vaccinated for COVID, that face-to-face meetings will become rare as employees just simply use their collaboration technology?
Yeah, so here's what I think. When we begin to do what we call pro development, it's that step in the process where you define what the user's expectations are. One of the exercises we go through is we define the kinds of meetings that a particular user community has. So what are the kinds of meetings an executive team has, or a sales team, or a manufacturing team, or whatever? And we see that there's 2 or 3 meeting styles that are just as effective over UC as they are in person. But there's generally 2 meeting styles that are not as effective over UC and really are better in person. And so those kinds of meetings, and we mentioned a couple of them, meetings that are around big decisions and consensus building and strategic outcomes and operationalizing change to the organization, those kinds of things, and meetings with customers around big deals. You need to make a deep connection between your brand and the customer, and step through a series of concerns and obstacles that you need to overcome in order to drive your business forward. Those are a couple of examples. There's actually several, but those are a couple of examples that are going to drive the need to come back to the workplace even after vaccinations. And then let's not forget that we build a community. The number one reason people stay at an organization isn't actually pay. Statistically, it's the community that they've built at the workplace. And that community is very important for a large percentage of our workforce. And the sense of getting back together in the same place and spending time together builds that community. Those are some things I would think about.
That's well said. I think we have time for one more question. I would say for those of you who did not get your questions answered today, but still would like to ask something of our panelists, Brad, please pose your question in the box listed there. We will follow up with you afterwards and get you the information that you're looking for. So here's one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. The question is, I've been asked to draft a return to work plan for my company. What are 3 of the most important things I should be thinking about when drafting this plan?
Yeah, so if you've been asked to draft a plan, I think the most important thing, and I think the answer to the polling question helps bear this out, the most important thing is to ensure that your plan aligns and gets energy behind satisfying workers' expectations. That's the biggest thing I would say. The second is in our conversations with customers, the number one criteria that everybody is concerned about is how do I communicate to the workforce that the office is safe? So defining what safe means to your workforce is critically important, and then aligning technologies in a way that it demonstrates not just compliance for the requirements or regulations that you have, but really I can demonstrate with you quantitatively why you're safe. That's really important. And then the third thing is finding ways to communicate and reinforce that and measure it as your workforce begins to come back to the workplace.
Well, that's great. So I just want to conclude the webinar today by saying thank you. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights. I hope our audience found some of the recommendations and suggestions here today are going to be helpful for you as you work to bring your employees back to the office and create a safe workspace for them. Please enjoy the rest of the day and look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care now.
Thank you so much.